Took it for a drive, first really hot day, and there's a puddle under it. How's it going? Hope you're doing well and staying safe. I know with all this craziness of things being shut down around here, barbershops are starting to open up, and maybe pretty soon I'll get my hair cut, and when I wake up I won't look like Bob Ross anymore. So if you follow my videos, you know behind me is the cheapest Porsche 911 Carrera Coupe with under 100,000 miles and a clean title, running, driving, all that good stuff in the United States, at least at the time of purchase. I paid just $12,500 for the car, and today I want to give you a bit of an update towards the end of the video. But one of the maintenance items that needed to be done was an oil change. An oil change had been done just 2,000 miles ago. However, the car had sat for a little bit, not really sat, but it wasn't being driven as much for a little bit. So only 2,000 miles have been put on in over a year. So it's time for some fresh oil in it. I called a few indie Porsche shops in my area and was just surprised at how much it costs to get an oil change. Hi, I need to get an oil change on a 1999 Porsche 911 Carrera. And how much would that cost? $450? Thank you. Hi, how much would an oil change be on a 1999 Porsche 911 Carrera? It's a two-wheel drive. $400? Thank you. Hi, I need an oil change on a 1999 Porsche 911 Carrera. $500? Thank you. I mean, how hard is it to change oil? So today I'm going to show you how to do a $300+ oil change on your 996 or 997 generation Porsche 911 for about $80. And even if you already know how to change your oil in your 911, stay tuned both for the update and also, you know, to get in the comments and debate what oil is best, because I know a lot of people are very particular about their oil and what weight, what brand, all of those kind of things. It's kind of like a religious denomination. So before you begin, here's what you'll need to be able to change your oil in a 996 or 997 generation Porsche 911. You'll want a breaker bar, gloves because it's going to get dirty, and the oil is also going to be hot, and we'll explain that in a second. If you have an earlier 911, there's a protective plate under the oil pan. You don't have to remove it, but it is easier to remove it, and I did. So you'll need a 10mm socket wrench if you have this. You'll need a torque wrench, which I know if you're used to changing like American cars, it's a little bit different, but you'll need a torque wrench to do a Porsche. And then you'll need about 10 quarts of oil. I used Mobil 1 5W50, and now I'm expecting everyone to get in the chat and say, no, don't use 5W50. Some people prefer 0W40 for some chain rattle issues. Some people prefer 20W50. Some people do 10W40. Some of it depends on your climate, so that you'll have to do some research to figure out what's best for where you live in. But the important thing is it's a good synthetic oil. You'll need a new crush washer because you need to replace that every time you replace your order. They're not very expensive. You can get a whole pack for like a couple bucks. It's optional, but it's a good idea to have a pair of scissors or some kind of snippers or some kind of knife that you can use. I'll tell you about why those are handy later on in the video. You'll need an oil filter adapter for a wrench. That's the correct size for your Porsche 911. Put in the description the part number that I used. There are a couple different options, but that'll give you an idea of exactly what size and everything that you'll need. You can get them at your local auto parts store as well as online. And you'll need an 8mm hex socket tool that goes onto a wrench. This is very important. You won't be able to drain your oil without it. So if you don't have any of these tools, you might have to make an initial investment, but in the long run, it's going to save you money over going to a shop. So it might cost you more than $80. Depending on what you already have. But once you have these, it's be about $80, depending on how much you pay for oil and a filter. The Mobil one I bought was on sale at the time, so it was $27 for 5 quarts, but it just depends on what the deal is. And I ended up buying 12 quarts. But even if you buy the parts the first time, normally it's going to cost you less than going to a shop. So here are the steps you need to take to change your oil. Drive the car. Getting the car up to operating temperature will help get more debris out of your oil when you change it. Now this is step number 2, but it's an optional step. In the 911, you do not have to lift it up. However, if you jack it up, put it on jack stands, or drive it on ramps, it is easier to change the oil because you have a little bit more space under there. However, you won't be on a flat ground, and the one nice thing with flat ground is everything comes right down to the bottom. You will have oil coming to the back side, so you may not get every ounce of oil that you otherwise could. If you have an early car, there's a protective plate under the engine that you don't have to remove. There is a way to change the oil without it. There's holes in there. I couldn't get my oil filter wrench in there without removing it, so I removed it for me. You need to position the oil drain pan under the car so it catches all the oil. Obviously, you don't want it everywhere. You still might make a mess. So putting something under that, I didn't listen to my own advice, but a lot of times I'll put like a cardboard box under there. That way, if anything comes up, it doesn't get all over my floor. One thing to note, you will need a drain pan that holds at least 10 quarts of oil. And depending on how tall this is, may depend on whether or not you can change your oil without raising the vehicle. If your drain pan is bigger, you will have to raise your vehicle. You don't have an option. If your drain pan is a low, narrow, long one, like what I bought, you can do it without raising your vehicle, and I tried it that way. It was a bit messy, but it does work. Remove the oil drain plug. How else is the oil going to get out there? That's where you'll take your 8mm socket tool and you'll put it up into the drain plug and break the torque and slowly remove it. Now remember, the oil will be hot from driving it, so you'll want to wear some protection, so some gloves that will keep you from burning yourself. And also a little trick, as you're unscrewing the drain plug, put a little upward pressure on it, and that will help make sure that you can control exactly when the oil flows out. It will give you a little bit more chance to stop that from happening without you being ready. This is the longest step in this entire process, and that is waiting for it to drain. There's up to 10 quarts of oil that are going to drain out of your car. You're probably going to get more like 8.5 or so quarts, 7 to 9 in that range, quarts of oil that actually drain out of your car, and some of it depends on if you've been burning oil. So if you've kept your hands clean, otherwise go wash them. Good time to do things like condition the leather in your interior. You'll still have time after doing that, so you can also do stuff like if you have an early car, it's a good time to clean up all the gunk that builds up in the protective pan if you've taken that off. That way you don't have that all just sitting there anymore. Now after most of that oil has drained, and it could still be draining a little bit, that's to remove the oil filter canister. Now some people may have changed, like if you have the IMS bearing solution, or some people just put adapter. You might have a canister type filter where the whole filter is the canister, but the stock 911, 996, and 997 have a paper filter element that goes into a canister. So using the oil filter wrench add-on, you can break the torque and then take that off. Now the filter wrench usually will stick on, and that's okay because we're just going to use that again later. After you get it off, you don't have to take it off immediately. Remember, there will be oil inside of the canister, so you're going to want to try to make sure that it drops into the oil drain pan, or you'll make a really, really, really big mess, which I, of course, am showing you what not to do while doing this. Now it's time to remove the oil filter. What will happen a lot of times, it'll stick out after you've taken the canister out. It'll still be up in the engine connected to the oil filter. There's kind of a tube up there. So you may have to reach up and push it down. This is where you're going to need the snippers or the knife, and this is just kind of a precautionary measure. You don't have to do this, but it is a good idea, especially if you don't have an IMS solution in your car, if you're on an original IMS, just to kind of see what's happening. Even if you're on an IMS retrofit, some of the ceramic ones, you may still want to do this just to be safe. So either use some snippers or a knife to cut open the paper element and then inspect it. Make sure there's not a lot of metallic objects in there, because that could be an early sign of potential IMS failing. It can also be signs of things such as chain tensioners. If you have a lot of like plastic pieces, it could mean that your chain tensioners need to be replaced, things like that. So checking the oil filter housing both inside and out and seeing what you have is a good idea. Mine was pretty clean. I didn't really have any metal or anything in it, really just clean. Now we need to install the new oil filter into the canister. So you put it in the canister, kind of push down on it. Otherwise you won't be able to get it into the car. I've seen some people also push it up on the tube with the engine. That's a little bit harder to do, so I find it easier just to put it into the canister. You also want to put in a new O-ring, and you're going to want to coat this with new fresh oil, and that'll just help make sure that there's a better seal so that it doesn't leak. Now you want to install a fresh crush washer onto the oil drain plug. Just like you did with the O-ring, you're going to want to coat this in fresh oil just to make sure you get the best seal possible. Next, you're going to take your torque wrench, you're going to take that 8mm hex socket, and you're going to torque the oil drain plug to 37 pound-feet of torque, or 50 Newton meters, depending on whether you use metric or you use standard. Likewise, you're going to need to torque the oil filter canister, and you're going to use your torque wrench along with the filter wrench adapter, and you're going to torque this one to 19 pound-feet of torque, or 25 Newton meters, again, depending on whether you're metric or standard. I will put both of those torque settings into the description so you don't have to remember it, because I know sometimes, ooh, there's a number that just flew out. It can be hard to remember all these numbers when you're just hearing them. Before you put in the oil filter canister, it's a good idea to pour a little bit of fresh oil into it. This will minimize the possibility of the engine running dry, even for a very small amount of time. Now that everything's been closed up, you're ready to fill it with oil. This is a great time to get your kids involved. If you have kids, you want to kind of teach them a little bit about cars. I know sometimes they can get in the way, but having them involved is a great way for them to enjoy cars and also to spend some time with them. I was able to use my two boys, and they both had fun just putting oil in. They missed a little bit, so next time I'll definitely use a funnel, because I learned that the hard way. But a little tiny oil mess, nothing too big, wasn't that big a deal to fix. And they really enjoyed it. I have a 12-year-old now, he just turned 12, and a 9-year-old boy, and they both liked it. We have a 2-year-old girl that we adopted as well. Unfortunately, she's just too small. So when she gets older, she'll also be out in the garage and helping, and kids love to help and use it, because when they're teenagers, they may not want to do it anymore. And this kind of depends on what year car you have. If you have an early car, you have a dipstick. You can check the oil as you're filling it up with the dipstick. So you want to put in about 7 quarts to start. Then after that, you're going to check with your dipstick and see what the levels are. And what you want to do is get it not full, but close to full, because what's going to happen is when you start the engine, the oil is going to find other little nooks and crannies where it hasn't already filled, such as filling in your oil filter canister, etc. So you're going to lose some of your oil. So it's a good idea to get it pretty close to full, but you don't want to overfill it either. So being a little less, about halfway on the stick or a little bit more than that, is probably a good idea. Now, if you have a later car, and even on the early cars, you can use this, but the dipstick is a little bit more accurate. You can make sure on the dipstick first, but you're going to have a digital gauge. So if you have a car without a dipstick, you don't have to check the oil level on the digital gauge. Now, you don't want to read over those 2 lines with the arrows. You want it to be within those 2 lines with the arrows, and I like to go a little bit under that initially, just because it's easy to overfill. As long as you're within that range, you're good, but you want to kind of be halfway or a little bit above halfway. That way when you first run the car, there's enough oil in it so that it can fill in all those different areas. This is the most fun step. You take it for a short drive. So you want to start the car. It is normal for the oil light to flash a couple times for just a second, then it should go off. If it stays on, then you have an issue. So after you start it, you might want to take it for a short drive, or at least let it run for a few seconds, but you don't want to drive it very far if you do drive it, because you want to make sure that you don't have any leaks or anything, and you probably running it a little bit in your garage and then turning it off is probably enough to let the oil get everywhere. This is optional, but it's something I like to do, which is let the car sit overnight. So usually when I do my oil change, I will change my oil on, say, a Saturday, and then Sunday morning or later in Sunday, after church or whatever, I like to fill up the oil then. So that lets everything kind of drip down wherever it needs to be, and you can check what the level is, and you'll often find that you'll either be at the very bottom of your dipstick or gauge, or you'll actually be a little bit on the low side. And that's not uncommon. That's one reason why you don't really want to drive it too much when you first put oil in, because letting it all sit just will let everything kind of go where it needs to. Now what you want to do is fill it up to about halfway or a little bit more and kind of top it off. I got it just a mark or two under the very top, and then I stopped. And the reason I did that was oil kind of moves and stuff, and I just want to make sure I don't overfill it, but you're within the good range. Yeah, and that's it. That's all there is to changing the oil on a Porsche 911, a 996 or 997 generation 911, 991, 992. I don't know, they might be similar, but I'm not sure. Now you can go pocket the cash that you saved, and hey, go get yourself like a performance exhaust or something if you don't have one on your car. They're a little quiet, but they're still good, even quiet. And now for those that have been following this and they didn't just want to learn how to change your oil, which I'm sure some of you just wanted to learn how to change your oil, here's an update on what is happening. I've had my first issue on the cheapest Porsche 911 Carrera Coupe in the United States with under 100,000 miles and a clean title, and it runs. Today I was driving the car, and when I pulled into the garage, it had an accident in the house. Well, it's house, right? The garage. Yeah, it leaked a lot of coolant. I smelled coolant as I'm coming in. I'm like, that is not good. And then I can see a trail of coolant. So I'm thinking the worst. I'm thinking burst pipe, cracked radiator. It could be the water pump out. I'm like, well, that's it. So this car had spent its whole life in the Monterey Peninsula. If you know anything about Monterey, California, it doesn't really get very hot there. It's a very temperate climate. I mean, a really hot day is going to be like 80 degrees over there. That's a lot different than where I live. I am more inland California, about an hour and a half from either Monterey. If I go a different direction, it's about an hour and a half, if traffic's good, to San Francisco. It is very common for us to get multiple days that hit the triple digits in Fahrenheit. Of course, if you're looking at Celsius, the triple digits might be a lot different. But over 100 degrees Fahrenheit is not unusual. In fact, just the other day it was 107. So I drove the car today, and it was one of the first really hot days that I've driven the car. So probably what hasn't happened most of its life is the coolant hasn't had to get up to pressure to cool down the car. Didn't run hot or anything, so it wasn't out of coolant, but obviously it's not retaining the pressure. So the first thing I do is I open the back trunk, engine cover, hood, whatever you want to call it, but where the engine is in an 911 in the back. And I could clearly see leaking out of the reservoir coolant cap fluid, just leaking out of there. It was very, very obvious that that's what's happening. So I had a similar issue happen with my Boxster where I had coolant spilling out. I didn't see it leaking out like I did in the 911, so that was kind of an interesting thing. It makes for more interesting footage for you. I knew that these 911s and Boxsters, 986 and 996, they have a different cap that had been redone because the seal on the cap for the original coolant cap had an issue with leaking through. Didn't seal as well as it needed to. So when I looked at this cap, the number is .00 that it ends with. The newest version is .04. So that right there told me that we've got a bit of an issue. Now, fortunately, before I sold my Boxster, I bought another coolant cap thinking that could be the issue. That turned out to be a water pump issue, but I had a coolant cap. They're the same part number, same everything, but it's the redesigned part. So after this car's done cooling down, because it literally happened just a little bit ago, and then I thought, hey, why not shoot a YouTube video? And then I can add that to it. So after my 996 cools all the way down, I'm going to put on the new cap and make sure to top off the reservoir with distilled water and radiator fluid, 50-50 mix as appropriate, making sure to get the same fluid as Porsche uses. It's the red one in this. You shouldn't mix coolant. That we can go into that another time. Or hey, get down in the comments and tell me what coolant you use if you have a 911, because just interested, as I'm going to be buying some, and I know the Porsche one is quite expensive, and I think any of them that you use for the 996 are fairly expensive for coolant, but you know, it was originally a very expensive car, so expect to pay a lot. But yeah, I happen to have this brand new, so, you know, it's not going to cost me more for the cap at least. I just have to buy the coolant. So thanks for watching. I hope this helped you change your oil. And also, if you were just here for the update on the cheapest Porsche 911 Carrera Coupe in the United States, yeah, it's leaked coolant today. So there's that. As this thing has issues, I'll make sure to tell you about them. And it's more entertaining, I guess, if it fails for you, so some value. It's not as much fun when you see it coming out, but at least it didn't end up being that big a deal. So if you liked this video, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. Hitting the thumbs up button really does help us with the YouTube algorithm, and it makes sure more people can see the video. And if you didn't like it, I'm sorry, I don't know what to say, but there's a lot of other videos on the internet, and you can go watch one of those and just leave that thumbs down button alone. Sorry, I'm trying to cool my audio recorder, so if you hear buzzy noise this whole time, that's what it's been. And if you haven't already subscribed and you found this useful or liked it in any way, then please go ahead and subscribe. We'd love to have you part of our community, and get down in the comments and start talking to each other. Let us know what oils you use, what you've done for your oil changes, and how much they cost if you had a professional do it. And just remember, with every subscription, a donation will be made in your name in the Buy a Middle-Aged Man a Porsche 918 Spider Fund. His name's David, and that car will be in my garage, right next to the cheapest Porsche 911 Carrera Coupe in the United States. And as always, if you're a regular viewer, thanks so much. You really do make this possible and fun. Now, all that's left to be said is get out there and drive, which I'll be doing once I have a coolant leak taken care of. See you next time.